Thank you very much. I thank Ginny for the kind words, and if I do enjoy a popular status in the political science department these days, it's partly because my trusted colleague Alex Willingham just retired, or he definitely would have had that honor, and it's great to see Alex here, although I have to say, I was happy that none of my political science colleagues were here to sort of rebut my argument that I will make for you this evening, but I think Alex will go easy on me, and I appreciate that, Alex. The kind words were partially help me out here. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to Ginny for introducing me, and you already sort of know the argument I'm going to make. It's in the title. There are a few things you may not know, which I think are of some relevance for this evening. First thing to note is I came up with this title and this argument way back in the first couple of days of July. So that was 3 months ago that I came up with this argument. This is not an argument that anybody was making 3 months ago. And if you think it was outlandish to think this today on the eve of debates, it was completely crazy to think about it 3 months ago. But I will say this, over the last 3 months, I felt better and better about my prediction every day, and particularly in the last 2 weeks, I feel very, very confident. I do have to say one little thing, though. There were a couple of polls that came out today in which Romney's position seems to have stabilized or improved a little, so I'm a little worried about that, but we'll worry about that tomorrow, not today. Second thing to note, and this is why I'm happy Alex is the only one of my colleagues here. I don't have any experience in polling, American voter history, lots of things that you really should know to talk about polling and how elections are going to turn out. I don't have that experience. I just want to say right off the bat that these are my impressions. My expertise in political science is American foreign policy, which really has little or no relationship to this election, although that actually might change. I'm not a George Marcus who has spent a lifetime studying these things. I will say one thing about experts, though. I remember having arguments with George about the 2004 election, and he was absolutely convinced that John Kerry was going to win, and I was ignorant, and many other of us were ignorant. We said, no, we don't think so. We think Bush is going to pull this out. Experts are not always right. The other thing about experts is they're certainly not united on this election. The main journal of the American Political Science Association just published a group of 13 forecasts by some of the most sophisticated modelers in political science. 8 of them have Obama winning, 5 of them have Romney winning. I don't think there is a sort of single expert truth on this election that you can count. Third thing, and I think it's very important to note, is I don't really have a partisan stake in this election. I am not. I've had students who work for me who think Obama is just the greatest American politician of all time. I don't have anything against Obama. I don't have anything pro-Obama. I voted for Republicans in my life. This is a completely non-partisan talk. And actually, my perspective, I think, was well summed up by President Obama a couple of weeks ago. He was on The View, which many people laughed at him for appearing on a show like that. And one of the hosts said, look, what will happen to this country if Mitt Romney is elected president? And Obama said, I think it'll be better if I win. I think bad things will happen if Romney will win, but America will still be great. America will still survive, regardless of who wins this election. That's basically my point of view on presidential elections in general. They're not the be-all and end-all of life that I think sometimes people treat them. Now, let's turn to the state of the race, which I think is important. Now, in talking about the presidential election, I think one thing we always have to keep in mind is winning the presidency means 51 separate races. When you hear lots of talk about national poll numbers and how people think about these things nationally, I find obviously there's useful information there, but always remember you only become president by winning electoral votes, not popular votes. Always very important. There was a poll conducted by ABC, Washington Post that just came out yesterday, and it showed a sort of tightening race on a national level. Obama was only up 49-47 over Mitt Romney. But if you looked closer into the story, it turns out that when you look at the battleground states, and I'll be talking about the battleground states in a few minutes, Obama's lead is a much more healthier 51-42. Romney might be happy with the headline, but I'm sure that Obama is quite happy to know that in the states that are really going to decide this election, his lead over Romney remains quite substantial. Now, we should always recognize that we don't have 50 or 51 competitive races in the United States. Actually, quite a good number of races aren't even competitive. No one will spend a moment thinking about whether Utah will go blue or Mississippi, reverse. No one's going to think about certain states in terms of voting Republican or Democrat. Utah's going to go Republican. Mississippi's going to go Republican. California and New York, certainly going to go Democratic. No one is even going to contest races like this. Now, I think the best place to start in terms of thinking about the election is look at what each candidate has in terms of what I would call absolutely solid states. States that consistently vote one party or the other and are not going to be changed in this election regardless of what happens over the next month. Now, I would think, and this is an important number to keep in mind in terms of starting, Obama starts with 142 solid, absolutely solid electoral votes, where I would argue Mitt Romney only has 76 solid electoral votes. Okay, now this, you can basically take 22 states out of the equation, which leaves you with 28 state races left in which you could at least entertain a debate. Let me give you a good example of a state you could entertain a debate about. Indiana. This is a state that Obama won in 2008 by the most narrowest of percentages. You could think, well, does this represent a trend, or maybe Democrats going to be very competitive in Indiana moving forward? Well, it's very clear looking at all the poll numbers that have been taken in Indiana since the start of the year. No, Indiana remains a Republican state. I guarantee you Barack Obama is not going to contest Indiana this way around. That's a state that you can solidly put back in the Republican camp. But take another state which raises interesting questions, Virginia, which used to be an absolutely solid Republican state, and many people think still leans Republican in many ways, which I think is true. But Obama won Virginia in 2008, and every poll taken in Virginia over the course of this presidential election season shows that Obama's still leading in Virginia. Clearly, Virginia, you add to that list of battleground states anymore. Virginia is a state clearly in play. Now, if you account for all the states that are highly likely to go to the Democrats or Republicans, I think the electoral math gets even clearer. Here are the states that you should be incredibly confident about Obama's prospects of winning and why. Now, all the numbers that I'm going to refer to you this evening when I talk about averages of polls, they all come from the Real Clear Politics website. It's online. It's a very useful way to keep up on things. And these are the states that I would argue Obama is almost certainly, I would go beyond almost certainly, but I think that's close enough. Oregon, he's up by 8.5 points. He won by 16 last election. New Jersey, up by 13, won by 15 in 2008. Connecticut, up by 14, won by 22 in the last election. Minnesota, 8.5, won by 10 last time. Maine up by 15, he won by 17 last time. Washington, he's up by 15, he won by 17 last time. New Mexico, he's up 10, and he won by 15 in 2008. Now, all of these states are virtual locks for Obama based on where he stands now and what he did in 2008. I would argue, for all intents and purposes, they're no different than the absolutely solid states we talked about before. If you put those states in Obama's column, which I would bet that strategists on both sides have already done and actually did a long time ago, you're up to 201 electoral votes for Obama with 69 left for victory. Now, Romney, of course, also has quite a few states that fall into this category as well, including very important states like Texas and Georgia. I'm not going to go through every single state. You can think of many of them. They all seem to be in the Midwest and northwestern parts of the country. But if you add up Romney's absolutely solid with almost absolutely solid. You get a total of 191 electoral votes, okay? Now, I think there's one state that bears watching in the weeks ahead, and this is Missouri. This is a state that McCain barely won in 2008 with a margin of only 0.1%. And the last poll taken in the state showed that Romney was up by 3 percentage points. 3 percentage points isn't bad. It's definitely still within the margin of error, but it was taken by the Rasmussen Group, which is generally a polling firm that sort of overestimates Republicans by a small amount. I think there's another factor that's playing in Missouri that could lead that to go for Obama, and that's the whole Todd Aiken disastrous Senate campaign, which I think is going to hurt Republicans very badly. So I think Missouri is a state ripe to be taken by Obama. Unfortunately, for reasons we'll talk about, I'm not sure Obama has a great incentive to try to win over Missouri, but I definitely think that that's a state out there where he could win if he contested it. Now, up to this point, if I had a room filled, well, you guys are a room of total political experts, but if I had professional pollsters, strategists, people, who really are living and breathing this election, I think they would say, Professor McAllister, you've said absolutely nothing of any interest. We all know this, okay? 201 to 191. We're not arguing with any of the states that you've chosen. So move forward from here. But I don't think we'd have any argument about my 201 to 191 assessment so far, okay? Problem here is, I don't think Romney has an easy victory in front of him after this, and I think that's really the heart of the election. There's not a single state left on the board that is easy or likely from this point out, and all of the polling trends for him at a state level have been absolutely going in the wrong direction. I think the first category you want to think about is something that I call the battleground states that weren't. Okay? There were 3 states that Republicans moving into this electoral season thought, we have a chance. These are places where we could win. I think the first place, obviously, you have to start out with is Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania always seems to be a state, and I'm sure some of your memories go further back than mine. Pennsylvania is always a state that Republicans think they can win, even though they haven't won it since 1992. There were lots of stories that maybe Pennsylvania, you hear a lot about the sort of southwest portion of the state. It is very clear that the Republicans are not going to win back Pennsylvania this year. There have been 40 polls conducted in Pennsylvania this year, and Romney has had narrow leads in just 3 of them, and most of those were taken, I think, in February, okay? If you average up all the polls that have been taken, Obama's lead is 10 points on average, okay? It is clear also, and most importantly, that the Romney campaign knows this as of right now. They know that they're not competitive in Pennsylvania, which is why neither the Romney campaign nor the super PACs associated with the Romney campaign are doing any serious advertising in Pennsylvania. It's a great rule of politics, follow the money. The money is not following Romney in Pennsylvania. It's very clear that Republican strategists have already written off a state with 20 electoral votes. The other 2 battleground states that weren't, Michigan, exactly the same story, okay? The Republican super PACs have already stopped ad buys in Michigan. The average of the polls at this point in time is basically, 8.8 percentage points. Now, this is a state that Romney, remember, he's the son of a former governor of Michigan. It's one of his 2 states he can potentially call his home state. Why is Romney not being competitive in Michigan? Well, and we'll talk about this later, clearly the auto bailout. There is no way that Romney is going to be able to recover from opposing the auto bailouts. This might serve him well nationally. In some other contexts, it is not going to serve him well in Michigan. And this is a state that, again, Republicans had some hopes about. It is not going to happen, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people, this year. Now, the last battleground, I haven't said it yet. Anybody want to take a guess what the last battleground state that wasn't might be? Wisconsin is absolutely right. This is clearly a state, and you can see the reasons why. Clearly, the failed recall campaign for Governor Scott Walker. This is clearly a state, his running mate, Paul Ryan, congressman from the 1st District. This is clearly a state that Republicans thought was gettable, and one they thought was important. 10 electoral votes, not unimportant. The recent average of polls is about 8 points that, that Romney is down here. Okay? Always should be remembered that Republicans have not won in Wisconsin since 1984. Obama won here by 14 percentage points. Now, here's the difference. They're still advertising in Wisconsin, but I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Admitting that you're not competitive in a state where your vice president is from is something they don't want to admit. So I think you won't see them abandon Wisconsin as they've abandoned, for the most part, Michigan and Pennsylvania, but Wisconsin's gone too, I would argue. What does this bring you up to? It brings you up to 247 electoral votes for Obama and a margin of 56 electoral votes over Romney. Okay, this brings us to really the 8 states that will matter from here on out. There are only 8 real battleground states in the election and the ones that will truly determine who wins. Now, it should be clear by now, Romney does not have any possibility of a decisive, we'll come back to this word decisive a little later, he doesn't have any chance for a decisive victory. If you were to take every single battleground state, the most electoral votes he could amass would be 291. Obama, on the other hand, could presumably get to 347 electoral votes, or a little higher, which I would argue is certainly a decisive victory. Obama won 365 electoral votes in 2008. I don't think anyone would argue that that was a decisive victory, and I think he's going to be in the neighborhood of that this time around. I'll give you a precise number in a few minutes, but I think we're looking at an election victory for Obama somewhere in that area. Now, Obama has multiple paths to victory, and Romney does not. One of the things that we need to start out when we talk about the battleground states, sometimes I think CNN and the news media let you think that all these battleground states are sort of equal, that they start from sort of ground zero and they're roughly equal forces. I think that is absolutely not true. Remember, all the battleground states are states that Obama won in 2008. Let's remember that he won 3 of them by double digits. Okay? I'm not going to go through every possible permutation, but a few of the, if we look at a few of these states, it'll show how daunting Romney's task is. Let's start with Florida. According to my calculations, if we start with Obama, again, roughly at 247 electoral votes, Florida's 29 would certainly put him over the top right there. If you look at the sort of current average of polls in Real Clear Politics, he's up by about 3.2 percentage points, averaging all the polls. The last 7 polls all have him in a lead. If you look at the last 4, he is up 7, 10, 8, and 9. And one of those polls was by Fox News, so this is not a, we'll come back to the liberal conspiracy argument in a minute, but clearly this is a consensus that goes beyond sort of the New York Times and the Washington Post. Let's talk about Florida a little more. I think one of the big mistakes that people will make looking back at the Romney campaign is he made a really bad choice for his vice president. There was actually a perfect vice presidential running mate for Romney, and that was Senator Marco Rubio. Why was Rubio perfect? Well, I think Rubio would clearly help out in Florida an awful lot. And we hear a lot of talk about Ohio being the absolutely decisive state. I've never understood this in terms of this election. Florida's 29 electoral votes, Ohio's only 18. Basically, Florida is an Ohio and a Wisconsin put together. This should have been your focus, rather than this idea that, well, Ryan will help me out in Wisconsin and maybe some other places, none of which has materialized. I think Rubio would have brought everything to the table that Ryan does. He's somebody, remember, Rubio was one of the Tea Party original candidates. He would have brought most of the things that Ryan ostensibly was bringing to the ticket anyway. Now, there's another thing about Ryan, and we can argue, and I'm sure we will, about him. There's one place where you can argue that he has strengths elsewhere. He is an absolute liability to the ticket in Florida, in a state where you have lots of elderly people worried about Medicare and other things. Ryan is the worst possible vice presidential choice for Romney, and I think, obviously, I think it's hurting him. And I think that's clearly an unforced error. I think Rubio also would have brought other things to the table, too. And I don't usually like to sort of make this analysis, but if there's one thing the Republican Party could have used, it was a younger person, someone of Hispanic descent, counter the image of the Republicans as a simply, old white guy's party. I think Rubio would have helped on lots of levels that even go beyond Florida. Let's talk about Ohio, which obviously is the other sort of crucial battleground. Romney I know Romney's had a lot of luck in his lifetime. He's really had a lot of bad luck in Ohio. Problem with Ohio is its unemployment rate is lower than the national average. Romney has another problem, too, in that the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, has every personal reason to convince the voters of Ohio that the economy is picking up, things are getting better, that we're on the right track. This certainly undercuts Romney's own message in Ohio. And it's very clear from the polls that this is the case. Obama is now currently up well, I've lost my exact figures for Ohio, but things are getting better and better for Obama in Ohio every time you look at the polls. Okay? What are the final battleground states that have some interest? And I'm not going to go through all of them real quickly. Colorado, Nevada, Iowa, New Hampshire. These are all states that Obama won by double digits or near double digits last time out. I also think Obama is going to take Virginia, although I can concede that Romney has real hopes there. I think Romney's best chance to win a battleground state is North Carolina, despite the fact that Obama currently has a lead in the polls. And I'm going to give Romney North Carolina, although I'm not totally sure he's going to win it, but I'm going to give it to him now. That brings us to a final tally, in my view, of 332 electoral votes for Obama, only 206 for Romney. That's my safe bet. That's my conservative bet. I actually think that Obama is going to pick up Virginia and Missouri as well, and that'll make the final tally 355 for Obama, 183 for Romney, and either result, I would argue, is decisive. All right, that's the numbers as I see them, as I think many pollsters see them. Clearly, and I should add this, most strategists would not go as far as I did. I think many of you probably read Nate Silver in the New York Times. He's predicting that Obama will get about 320 electoral votes, so I'm a little higher than him, but I'm certainly not out on a cliff here, I think. Let's talk about a couple of issues that have emerged, and here I want to sort of speak to sort of skeptical views, and I know that I have lots of people out here who are skeptical. I want to just deal with a couple of issues. First, I'm sure some of you have been hearing arguments about the polls are skewed in favor of Democrats, that more Democrats are appearing in all of the polls. I think this issue has been pretty fairly debunked in the last week or two by reputable pollsters. Again, I think one of the clearest indications that we're not dealing with a sort of liberal media pollster conspiracy is Fox News' polls are all roughly in line with the polls of ABC and the New York Times. There's not a great bit of difference. This gets to, in a sort of technical level that I don't want to go, but it's very clear that the argument that if we only had the proper representation of the audience, that Romney would be winning by 7 or 8 percentage points, which there's a whole website, you can go to it, Unskewed Polls, that is basically making this argument about Romney. I don't think there's any validity to it. And I'll say, I think there's one good tip-off you can tell that there's no validity to it. I have yet to hear a Romney pollster, either publicly or privately, say, yes, we absolutely agree that the polls have been skewed against them. They may argue that the race is tighter than some of the main polling organizations are arguing, but they roughly, we're talking on the margins. I'm sure even the most optimistic Romney pollster would say, look, we're a couple of points behind in many of these places. Second, and I think somewhat stronger argument against the picture I painted is, look, polls are a snapshot. There's still 35 days to go. Lots of things can happen. We have debates coming up in the next couple of weeks. Well, true, and we'll get to this, but I think there's a couple of things to realize, which is since we have started keeping records about polls and everything else, since 1936, only 1 out of 19 candidates who was leading in the polls in late September wound up losing the popular vote in the election. That was Thomas Dewey in 1948. Besides Dewey, only Al Gore lost the Electoral College after enjoying a lead in the polls in late September, and Gore did win the popular vote after all. Now, another reason to be skeptical about this idea that so much can change in the next week, which, by the way, every, I think, news organization sort of has an interest in pumping up. They want to keep us active for the next 35 days. I'll say something. If you're a Romney fan or supporter, I think you have a good week coming up. I think the media really wants to say this is a race, and I think you'll see a lot of stories sort of pushing in this direction. There's one fact about the electorate that's really important to understand, which is it used to be in the old days, people would make up their decisions, their minds, right before the election. This just isn't true anymore. At best, probably about 6 to 7% of the population, the potential electorate, is undecided as of this moment. And there have been lots of great studies about this, which is basically most people have already made up their minds on this election. And now, with early voting becoming more and more popular, and a lot of this, I think, has already been decided. But we can argue that, and there are certainly minds out there, and things can change. But I think we should also be skeptical about how much they're going to change. Now, debates, and I think a lot of people, particularly the organizations that are going to be showing these debates, really think this is crucial. And you've seen lots of sort of great stories, great debate moments. All well and good, but we have very little evidence that debates actually change the basic dynamics of a race. Everybody knows the example of Nixon supposedly looking badly in debates and then going on to lose. The problem with that argument is we only had one real polling organization at that time. It's hard to tell how much of an impact debates had in all of that, but let's give that one. The other sort of great example of debates changing the course of a race, again, unfortunately, Al Gore in 2000. It does appear to be clear that Bush rose after Gore sighed during debates and other things like that. Clearly something of some importance. You can argue that those debates did take someone who was behind and actually ultimately lead them to a victory. All right. Maybe debates will have some impact. You know, there are things you could say on the other side. I think one of the best examples, everybody remembers Gerald Ford's sort of famous gaffe in 1976 when he said the Soviet Union, no one would claim the Soviet Union dominates Eastern Europe. People forget that when Ford made that gaffe, he was down about 10 to 12 points in the polls. He actually made it a very close race, and so even after that gaffe, he only lost by about 2 percentage points overall. So gaffes do not ruin a candidacy, even if they happen. And if you can think about a comparable Obama or Romney gaffe, I don't know, you have to ask yourself, who's more likely to win these debates and everything else? Let's say it's even. And by the way, both sides, of course, are playing down expectations and everything else. But I don't know, if you're hoping for a sort of knockout performance in debates, I think you're going to be disappointed. I also think there's another factor, which maybe we could talk about in question and answer. Those last two debates are going to focus on foreign policy, and I don't think this is Romney's strong suit at all. And I think it'll help Obama look presidential and will help him win. But we can come back to that. Okay? Actually, I'm going to stop there. I have lots and lots of things to say, but I can already tell that some people are angry, upset. Some people look happy, but maybe we could talk about more general things related to politics in the election. Not so much, well, I'd be happy to talk about the horse race dynamics of it, but let's have a conversation about the election. Yes?
Assuming you're right, what effects is this going to have on Congress? It won't be a one-term president, so what do you think will happen?
I have to be honest with you. I have not spent, I've been spending all of my time working. I'm sorry. The question is, what impact do you think this will have on the makeup of the Congress? I'll give you a short answer, which I have no confidence in. I think this race, let's always keep in mind when I say Obama decisive victory, that doesn't mean Mitt Romney isn't going to get 48% of the vote. I mean, we're talking, John McCain got 46% of the vote. So keeping in mind those elections, I don't think that Republican candidates are going to get hurt nationwide because I think Obama is going to beat Romney. So that would be my short answer. But I haven't in any way researched it or done anything along those lines. Yes?
2 questions.
Sure.
One of my theories is that Romney knew in August he was going to lose, and he picked Paul Ryan so that nobody could ever say, oh, if he hadn't gone out on a limb and done something bizarre, pardon me. My second question is, because I am so pessimistic, what can you envision happening, like with Libya, since foreign policy,
sure,
between now and November that could, on a dime, turn everything around?
Excellent questions. First one, the question was, the theory is that Romney picked Ryan because he knows he's going to lose. I will decisively argue that one. I don't believe it. There's no way you can put yourself through all of this if you know you're going to lose. Romney certainly thinks he is a better leader than Obama. He has not spent all these years to sort of be fatalistic. Now, he might have a more realistic appraisal of his chances, and I will say I think there's a little something to your theory. I think it was very important for Romney to win the Republican nomination, something he had tried for and failed. I think it was very important for him to do that, and I think he will always consider that an accomplishment of importance. But no, I still think he can win. I still think he thinks he can win. Now, the choice of Ryan, again, I'll just give you my own sort of sense on it. I think he looks at Ryan as sort of a slightly younger version of himself to a certain extent. They sort of look alike. They have the same sort of mannerism, a little bit, not totally. More importantly, I think Romney knows that many Republicans don't trust him at all, and that by picking Ryan, he was telling those people in the Republican Party, look, I've given you the guy that you really love, now you should back the ticket wholeheartedly. And he probably thought you wouldn't have gotten that same reaction from a Rubio pick or anything else. I think the other reason why Ryan got selected over people like Rubio is, there's not too many skeletons left in Ryan's closet. Rubio, I think they probably said, who knows? They didn't want to risk a sort of youngish, another sort of Sarah Palin this time out. I think those are the reasons why Ryan got selected. Second question, what could happen in the world that would turn this entire election around? I have to be honest with you, I don't know. And I don't think, for example, that, let's imagine we have 3 weeks of protests in the Middle East. I'm not sure that that is necessarily going to put Romney over the top. Although, I will, say another thing. I think what Romney is going to try and do from here on out is to say, you know what, Obama is Jimmy Carter. And then you can point to the bad economy, which Carter had, and now you can say, look, turmoil in the Middle East. That was Jimmy Carter all over again. And it's interesting that Romney clearly 2 months ago didn't want to talk about foreign policy. One, the American people don't care about it in this election, and it's not his strong suit and not something he cares about. You can tell, he had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today And there was a good story in the New York Times that actually came out about 20 minutes before I came here that the Romney team is now saying we're going to broaden our spectrum. It's not just going to be the economy. It's going to be foreign policy and other things. So they're clearly moving in that direction. But I don't know how. I mean, there are two ways to look at this. One, if something really bad happens, Americans have a tendency to rally around the president at the time. But who knows? I wouldn't. You never know. But I don't see anything in particular. And Israel is not going to strike at Iran's program in the next month or so. No way.
James, what you say and what I read warms the cockles of my heart. I have one concern, however.
Yeah.
4 years ago, and incidentally, I don't have a lot of friends, so this is germane.
Me neither.
You did the same thing then. I had a lot of friends and acquaintances 4 years ago who probably voted for a Democrat for president for the first time in their lives. If not the first time in their lives, one of very few times in their lives. I remember a lot of who they were.
Sure.
I can't find one of them that is going to do that again in this election. So I take my small
I might ask you a question. Are they not voting or they're going back to Romney?
They're voting. They're going to Romney.
They're going to Romney.
And so I take that small sample size and project it nationally. Of course, I worry about everything, but I worry about that. Is anybody else, do you think, focusing on that, or is that?
Well, actually, not to worry you, but I did see a poll in CNN which shows a sort of enthusiasm gap. It seems more Republicans are excited about voting in this election than Democrats. I don't know what to make of that and how that'll translate it. But I do think there is a sense. By the way, I have lots of Republican and conservative people who send me things all the time. And their argument, and I think this is a sort of thing making the rounds in sort of conservative circles, is to say, how can anyone say that Obama is going to get more votes or rally the same enthusiasm he had in 2008? And the other argument they make is, clearly Romney is a much better candidate than McCain was, so therefore, you argue these things and you can talk yourself into a Romney victory. I think the enthusiasm will be there for Obama, not at the same sort of levels. I think also, I don't buy this idea that all of America views Romney as a much better candidate than McCain. I remember in 2008, McCain beat Romney in New Hampshire, which is obviously very tied up with sort of Massachusetts politics and everything else. I am not sure that Romney is a better candidate than McCain. Yes, he can talk with much more authority on the economy, but he has some liabilities too. I mean, McCain's an American hero. McCain has lots of things going for him as well. So I don't buy the second part, that Romney is so much a better candidate than McCain that clearly this election is going to be a lot tighter. I could be wrong, but I don't necessarily see that. Yes?
What impact do you see the voter registration situation playing out, if any? What impact do you see that having?
The question was, how do I see various voter registration campaigns playing out? And I have to be honest with you, I haven't come across a discussion about this or any sense. Do you have something that would add? Look, Republicans and Democrats always say they've got a great ground game that's going to turn out all of their followers. I don't know.
I'm thinking more in terms of the states that have voter suppression, or certainly looks at it.
I have to be honest with you. I don't think voter suppression is going to be a major issue. I have no doubt that there are places where this is going to, some places where this is going to play out. It's obviously an injustice if it happens in one place. I do not see this as a phenomenon that's going to influence the direction of a particular state, let alone the general election. And obviously, I hope I'm right about that one. Yes?
Used to be, in this country, we said it was very tough to beat an incumbent.
Yes.
Yet the people had to decide to fire the guy in office. And that's certainly true on the congressional level.
Sure.
But then we had Carter who lost, and we had George H.W. Bush who lost. But what do you assess as the value of the incumbency to Obama as part of this whole process?
Well, I think, well, look, it's there are good points and bad points. Obviously, Obama in 2008 could run and say all of the great things he was going to do for America and the economy. Now he has to run on a record in terms of what he's done. He has to talk about, unemployment rates and job creation and rates of growth. I think the incumbency provides many ways. For example, just last week, Obama can go to the UN, command a world stage, and he can do that in 9 million different ways. There are clearly things he can influence. He can make sure that, for example, the U.S. files unfair trade practice suits against China. This is not something that Romney is in a position to do. And I'm sure there are lots of ways. I think this is actually one of the arguments that people make about the debates and how they're going to help Romney, which is now Romney gets to sort of share a stage with the president, and now he gets boosted up as a sort of equal just being on that level. I think, for the most part, better to be an incumbent than not. I still think there are advantages to incumbency. Yes?
Tie the 2010 election to the 2012 election.
Sorry?
Tie the 2010 election to the 2012 election. The 2010 election was an overwhelming referendum in support of Republicans. Do you think that will carry over or not?
I obviously think it will not. I don't think Republican victories in 2010 are going to carry over to the presidential race. And I think there are lots of reasons for that. But I think this comes down to my basic take on this election. I don't think Romney. Look, let me put this as baldly as possible. There are lots of things that Obama is hurting. When your sort of favorable, unfavorable ratings are +2 or +3, this is terrible. When you have unemployment numbers like he has, I think that's terrible. The problem is in a presidential race, it's still going to come down to a choice between Obama and Romney, and I just don't see the evidence that the American people are willing to replace Obama with Romney. That's what it basically comes down to. I think the factors of Republican versus Democrat become less important in this election, and it's going to be more Obama-Romney, and I think Obama is winning that, at least so far. Yes?
If the slightest possibility of Ron Paul being on the would there be a chance that he will be spoiler like NATO was 12 years ago?
Who?
Ron Paul.
Ron Paul. I do not think Ron Paul will be a spoiler in this election. He'll be a nuisance. I don't see it. Certainly not along the lines of Nader. This is a story that maybe Alex can relate to, but I remember in the 2000 election, I had at least 4 members of my department who were all enthusiastically for Nader. I don't think, I'm sure Ron Paul has his supporters too. Nader had an organization, he had a critique. I think Ron Paul, I don't think he rises to the Nader. But look, if he does this another 2 or 3 times, maybe. Yes?
Do you think the Electoral College system should change or will change in the near future?
Ugh, terrible question. No, it's a very good question. I actually like the Electoral College. I'm a fan of the Electoral College, and I understand all the arguments against it. I think the Founding Fathers had a reason. They didn't want everything to turn on one popular vote. I kind of like the Electoral College. I know I wouldn't want to have to defend that. But I like the Electoral College. So,
It makes us not count in Massachusetts.
Obviously, there are drawbacks to the Electoral College, but in general, I like it. I like the fact that a president has to try and construct a sort of broader coalition. Can't just spend all your time in California and New York and ignore everyone else. Yes?
Do you think that the issue of who gets to name any potential Supreme Court nominees, that will have an influence on this election?
You know, I actually think that the question was, do you think naming Supreme Court justices will have an impact on the election? I think Supreme Court justices are largely an issue that both sides use with activists and fundraising. I don't think this is an argument that these guys want to have in front of the general public. So I think Supreme Court issues are more likely to sort of be a sort of much more a fundraising thing than to sort of appeal to your base. Romney will certainly make that case to his people. Obama will make it just as strongly to their side. I'm not sure these guys want to spend a lot of time debating this. This is not something that I think either one is going to put front and center in their campaigns. It's a back burner issue. Everybody knows where both of these guys stand on these questions. I don't see either of them saying, you will not see Romney saying, look, the American people, the reason why I should be elected president is Supreme Court. And I don't think you'll see Obama making that argument. Again, front and center. If it comes up and they have an opportunity, they'll make it. But it's not going to be a major focus, in my view.
James, I'm surprised no one's mentioned the economy. How is Obama surviving this horrendous economy? Unemployment, businesses failing.
Okay, I've thought about this question. I'm actually ready for it. So when you think about that great issue, that question that I thought it was great for Romney to raise at the convention, stealing the Ronald Reagan line, this president cannot tell you you're better off than you were 4 years ago. Well, and again, I have my own sort of unique economic, I'm tenured, I work at Williams College and everything else. I'm not worried about losing my job, so I have a different one. But I do remember what I was thinking about in January 2009, and I thought we were on the verge of a Great Depression. No one could even remotely think about where things were going to end. I was thinking, unemployment rates, 15 to 20%, other great financial institutions going down. I have to say, I don't think we worry about those sorts of fears. So, in other words, I don't have the same sorts of fears about the economy today, and I haven't had them for a year or two, that I had 4 years ago. So in that sense, I would give Obama credit for that. I think the other question is, do I think, and this is where maybe Romney would have been a better choice than McCain, if McCain had been president, do I think that the economy would be as good as, as it's not good, but do I think it would be much worse if McCain had been elected? I think it does. So let me come back to the other question. The economy is not good, very problematic in many ways. This is not going to be one of the great chapters when Obama writes his memoirs, but I do think that a substantial percentage of the American people realize he inherited a really bad situation. They may not vote for him because he didn't make it much, much better, but I think he's going to retain enough people who say, well, okay, the worst didn't happen. And number two, I think there are people, or again, not a majority of Americans, but higher numbers who think we're slightly moving on the right track. I forgot which columnist in the New York Times had this argument the other day. The other problem is Americans have sort of accepted that things aren't going great, but they're not going radically backwards, and that's good enough. And in his view, that was problematic. I'm trying to remember which one. That's sort of where I stand on the economy. So I think Obama stopped things from becoming much worse. Or look, maybe he doesn't deserve all the credit for that, but in terms of that basic question, I'm not worried about the same things I was worried about 4 years ago when it comes to the basic health of the economy. And now we have a real economist, so I'm if you're going to help me out, that would be great.
Have you seen, we keep hearing this argument that somebody with business experience will do better on the economy, and yet I'm not familiar with any evidence in that area, so are you. And secondly, your confidence in your forecast suggests that you're not worried about an avalanche of super PAC money in the last month. Why not?
Two things. One, Obama is very good at raising money. There are lots of, you've seen lots of stories over the last couple of weeks that suggest, first of all, Romney doesn't control all the money. Obama has more control over money that he can spend in the last 35 days. I think most people are convinced, and again, things could change, that they're going to face themselves largely on an equal playing field in terms of money. I have not heard the argument that Republicans are absolutely going to swamp what the Democrats can do in terms of spending in the next 35 days. Remember, Obama vastly outspent McCain last time around. He won't do that this time, but I don't think there's going to be a huge financial gap. Great presidents with economic experience, I'm not familiar. I don't have any sort of great examples of, not even going to go there. I will say, on this issue, and my perspective would be a lot different, if Romney were someone who had created a company that made things like this podium or these chairs or some computer application that was taking over the world, I think he would be beating Obama by a lot. I think the American people would be voting for somebody who could, had this sort of, some of you may remember Lee Iacocca from the 1980s, where everyone always hoped he would run for the Democratic nomination. I think someone like that could make an effective and believable sort of case against Obama. Elect me president and I will be creating jobs and new industries everywhere. Romney's sort of argument, well, Bain Consulting and all the things I created there, well, there are other sides of that. Did that create jobs, lose jobs? The kinds of things that Romney has shown in the business world, well, I'm sure, look, you have to be a very smart guy to make the money that he's made and everything else, and I know he had advantages and privileges and everything else. I have no doubt that he's a very, very smart guy. It is not the kind of business expertise that I think is going to help him in this election. It raises as many questions as it solves. So if Romney had been a Steve Jobs-like figure in running for president, I think he would be much better off than the kind of business experience he's actually had.
What do you think the framers of our Constitution would say about the effect of the super PACs, the size of the money that's raised, the ability of corporations now to open their doors and to flow as much money as they wish into the political process at the very high levels, and the fact that from all of this money, we wind up with a government that is paralyzed to face the major problems in the country?
Well, keep in mind, and I'm sure Jim McGregor Burns would say this if he were here, the founders sort of designed a government that has sort of built-in deadlock in the first place. So I'm not sure a paralyzed government, obviously they wouldn't want that, but they wouldn't, founding fathers feared a sort of activist government. Look, the whole money question, I think Michael Beschloss, if anybody saw his talk a couple of weeks ago, I think gave eloquent testimony. This is incredibly problematic. It's only getting worse and worse over time. This election, it's reaching $1 billion. It's crazy. How it's going to end, obviously, recent Supreme Court decisions are fostering this. I don't know. I'd like to see it come to an end. I will say, and I know Obama's your guy, Obama hasn't been a fan of anyone, hasn't helped the cause of keeping money out of politics too. And I understand it. Hey, that's the way the system is. But he has played this game with a relish and gusto, and he doesn't even say any words anymore about changing this system. So there's guilt on all sides, I think, on the question of money in politics.
This may be unfair because your talk is about the presidential election, but do you have any feeling about the Massachusetts senatorial election between Elizabeth Ward and Scott Brown?
Well, I have to say, I now live on Bridges Road, and I was heartened that there's a house on Route 7 that now has Scott Brown and a Mitt Romney sign. I think this is great. I'm a big fan of diversity, so I like this. I have to say, and again, none of this should be taken seriously. I have like terrible opinions on this. I sort of like Scott Brown. I like the fact that someone is now running for the Senate with these ads that are absolutely content-free for the most part. I'm Scott Brown. I'm on the road. He does seem like a nice guy. I think I'd want to go see a football game with him or have a beer. I have to say, Elizabeth Warren. I had a TA teaching a research assistant this summer who she's got the same crush on Elizabeth Warren that she has on Obama. It's a little too much for me. But I think in the final analysis, Scott Brown's in the wrong state. I think he'll keep it much closer than any Republican would. I think he's running a really wise campaign. You'd actually not know he's a Republican from his campaigns. I will say one thing in terms of a perverse outcome. I could see Massachusetts voters saying, you know what, I'm pro-Obama, Obama's going to win, so now let's elect Scott Brown to sort of balance it out. And I could see her maybe in a long shot getting hurt by such dynamics, but it's hard to be a Republican. If any of you are Republicans, it's impossible to be a Republican in Massachusetts. It's just very, very hard to do. The Coakley thing was a horrible fluke, and kudos to him for winning. I don't see him pulling it off again. You can only get that victory because someone wasn't paying attention last time. Now everybody's paying attention. And say what you want about Elizabeth Warren, she is not going to miss a beat. She's going to be there. She's going to work hard. So I suspect Warren will win. Any final questions, or how about one more?
Discuss Afghanistan in relationship to the foreign policy in Obama and Romney.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a short synopsis. Obama, like all Democrats, I think largely to weaken Bush, had to make the argument that Obama was the good war, the war that we should be fighting, the real war against al-Qaeda. I think he came into office, and I think people told him very clearly, this is not going to work out. I think Obama said, look, you guys want 100,000 American forces. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to give you half of that number approximately. I think they very rapidly concluded shortly after that, this is not going to work out. We need to start thinking about coming home in 2014. And that's what Afghanistan's going to be from here on out, just how Americans leave. I don't know how many of you have noticed that violence is on the upsurge in Iraq. Americans don't care about this anymore. As long as Americans aren't dying, we actually don't care about this all that much, and that's what's going to happen in Afghanistan. Now, by the way, and this is one of the problems, Romney could be critiquing Obama an awful lot on Afghanistan, were it not for the fact that Republicans basically wanted Obama to go all out in Afghanistan, and now they're sort of trapped. They can't make an argument, Mr. President, you squandered American lives, because in reality, Republicans wanted to squander even more. So Afghanistan is not an issue that will help Romney at all. And actually, I think it'll hurt him, too, because I think he'll make a lot of criticisms that people will see as absolutely, you shouldn't have specified your withdrawal date and everything else like that. I think people will see through that. That will not help him. How about absolutely one last question? Yes.
How about the congressional elections? Any predictions there?
You know what? I'm going to say no, I don't have any, and I'll turn to one more question, and then we'll call it a day. I just have none.
What are the Dublin bookmakers, what are they saying now? How do you compare to them?
I'm going to say I don't know, and if someone's got a question I could answer, I'll take that one. Or if not, we'll call it a night. Well, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.